very important to consult the handout because Jacob has been accused of Gnosticism, as came up in the conversation with Phil. And he's not Gnostic or Gnosticizing, but he's highly symbolic. He's a genius, actually, and yet not yet fully understood. Ephraim may be poetic, but Jacob is highly symbolic. And I think you find that in the discussion about the church. So we're working through it together, as it were. And in my presentation, I codify rather than interpret because I inherited this project of this homily. Dana Miller was a monk of Holy Transfiguration Monastery, the one that publishes True Vine, and he's borderline genius. He's doing Greek philosophy now at Fordham. He left the monastery and he got a full position at Fordham University. So he's not able to publish the homilies that he translated. So they were given to me to edit and then to do the notes and help the publication. But the translation is his. And what you'll find in the handout, at the end, I actually put the two long passages that I'll be reading and quoting. So as I read them, you can see them. Divine Revelations and Jacob Responds. They are both his translation. We have another translation of Graffin in French, and also El Khoury, who has done, there's a lot of work being done now on church in the early Syriac tradition, especially in Jacob, but in general, the concept of church is being looked at, which is interesting. I don't know exactly why, but it's happening. And he hasn't translated this whole homily, but he does have another translation of the passages that we're looking at. So I'll give, the bibliography is given here for El Khoury, Types and Symbols of the Church in the Writings of Jacob of Sarug. And I would highly endorse looking at that when you have the occasion to do it. Okay, so why don't we just go through the handout for a second. I begin with a brief discussion of the power of love in discerning Scripture according to Jacob of Sarug and how he uses it in this homily. Then there are the two main divisions in the homily, Divine Revelations and Jacob Responds. In Divine Revelations shows how God's providence guided Jacob to that place where he slept, that he might be the one who betrothed the church to the Son of God. That in itself is awesome, in the sense of the symbolic content of that. Jacob Responds shows how God's providence guided Jacob to that place. And then I give the reference to El Khoury, Types and Symbols of the Church in the Writings of Jacob of Sarug. Then there's another section which speaks specifically about prophecy, and it's also by El Khoury. Types and symbols contain the whole truth about the Son and are recorded in the Old Testament. This means that God manifested his beloved throughout the OT. And I cite the article, which is published in Patrimoine Syriac. But very well done, all his research. The one I mentioned above, his dissertation, is not yet published. I hope it soon will be published. Then next I look at the letters of Jacob of Sarug, a brief exploration of the term to mix, used by Mar Jacob to describe the union between Christ and the church. And then referring, I quote from the letters of Jacob, the translation of Albert, which was done in Patrimoine Syriac. Then to continue from that, because none of this, as I say, I codify, I don't interpret, and I don't know if I'm at a stage yet where I can, and also because Jacob is so symbolic, I don't think anybody actually knows where it will take us. So I continue with what Mar Jacob has the conviction that the betrothal between Christ and the church was hidden in the prophecies, beginning with Mount Sinai, then prefigures Christ's betrothal at the church at Golgotha, but time-wise. There's the betrothal at the Jordan, finally the betrothal at Golgotha, according to Mar Jacob. Jesus liberates the betrothed, the church. And here I refer to the research of S.K. Joshua, Father Joshua, Church and the Bride, another unpublished dissertation, which would be wonderful if it were soon published. Then I conclude with something that's perhaps one will say, well, what does this have to do with the prophetic? It's the research of Susan Harvey, Biblical Women as Images of the Church, to continue the discussion of the church's journey begun at Bethel and after the incarnation. It's helpful to look at biblical women as images of the church in Jacob of Serug. And that would be Jephthah's daughter as the bride of blood in Judges 11, Tamar, Genesis 38, and the sinful woman, and where Jacob combines the 4 gospel accounts. And I give the citation, the reference to where Susan Harvey's article, it's over 30 pages, but it's just excellent understanding of it. So now I'll just go through and we'll see where we get. I begin with a discussion of how Jacob emphasizes love in relation to Scripture. Other people have noticed it as well. Faith, as indicated by Ephraim, is never neglected, but there is in Jacob's letters and Mimra an insistence on the power of love as an exegetical principle. It does not seem formulaic or even only an aspect of cognition. Rather, it's intrinsic to his soteriology, which underlines the understanding of Scripture. According to Bulosoni, the Christological controversies of his time pushed Jacob deeper into Scripture, where instead of definitions, he found the mystery, raza, of Christ on every page. According to Jacob, the Scriptures provide the God experience of the people of God in various forms of human communication. Rather than providing defined truths, the Scriptures furnish experiences of divine human encounter. Thus, Scripture is an ongoing revelation through its mysteries of God's love for mankind, and the only adequate and effective response, according to Jacob, is love. And even here, I mean, this is throughout the homilies, you will find a recurrent insistence on love as an exegetical principle. Love alone, but the beginning of this as well, love alone possesses an ear that tries every word, and it grows not weary whenever it inclines to listen. One must attend to the histories of the righteous with love, for it was also through love that they drew near to God. So, coming to start with the 2 main sections in this particular homily on Jacob's revelation at Bethel, I quote, and I give some of the translation here, and this is the translation of Dana Miller. I'll read through, we'll see how much time we have, but you have it to look at as well if we have to stop. Divine revelations. As soon as he went forth from his father's house, mysteries preceded him. And on that path they descended with him and ascended like unto merchants. He took a staff with him as he descended on his way, so that the cross of the sun should thereby be truly portrayed. Who betrothed a wife with a staff, if not Jacob, who in setting out took nothing with him but this? This staff furnished his entire marriage gift for his brides, and by it he guarded from injury the sheep which he tended. By it he drove off the savage beasts from his flock, and in this staff he found a companion for his way and riches in his sojourn. The cross alone has revealed the Son of God unto the world, already, according to Mar Jacob, visible with Jacob at Bethel. And it caused all riches to pour forth from him upon created things. Hereby the church of the nations, the abandoned one, was betrothed. Hereby Satan and death were put to flight like thieves. Jacob took its type when he descended to Haran, and for this reason his path was more sublime than other paths. He slumbered upon his staff, and placing the stone as a pillow, he fell asleep, even as the Son espoused the church and died upon the cross. Jacob sees in this biblical account a foreshadowing of both the cross of Christ and his death. The angel saw that he embraced his staff and slept on the mountaintop. The heavenly host surrounded him to see the image of the crucifixion. Jacob's slumber depicts the mystery of the death of the Son, and his staff is a symbol of the cross. He took the staff with him when he went on the journey, that it might represent the Son's cross. Not only does Jacob's sleep depict the scene of the crucifixion, but it prefigures the betrothal of Christ to his church. I found that awesome, and for me it was new, this prefigurement of the church by Jacob here. Just a few things here, as you'll see, to mention some of the vocabulary. Portray, depict. You'll find a lot of visual imagery for write instead of, and in fact, Sidney Griffiths has done that, image and word in the early Syriac tradition, and how important it is to see what he intends by depict. It's more than just a word, it's an image that Jacob creates. And then of course here, Christ, the cross and the staff, and the church betrothed already, which he talks about here. Maybe we go on to the next section, which is the next. There are just two main sections in this particular homily that go directly to the church being prefigured, and this is the church. Jacob responds. The cross descended so as to effect the contract of betrothal, but without the oil, its word could not be certain. The type of the sun shone forth in a dream upon that discerning man, and when he was awakened, he depicted for him a seemly image. Revelation descended and stopped him on the path as he was journeying, that he should not pass on until he has betrothed the church unto the Son. Accomplish what pertains to me, God says, and thereafter go about your business. Engrave, that's another visual imagery, depict, engrave, and paint. Engrave for me the types, and then you shall go and seek your own affairs. Make here for me a mystical marriage feast through this new vision, and thereafter take a wife pleasing to your soul, for she is also a symbol. Betroth the church to me, and then you shall be the betrothed to the daughter of Haran. Build for me a house, and then pursue your own affairs. But if the daughter of the king is not mystically betrothed, then neither will your path attain its goal successfully. Make for me a marriage contract with the church and go your way, walking on the path in which all mysteries are portrayed. Another word to go together with paint and depict and engrave. Raise up a memorial of your vision upon the mountain and then depart, lest the sight of that mystery should slip away from your mind. Jacob was illumined by the revelation which spoke with him, for that mighty vision during sleep inflamed him greatly. Truly, he said, the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not until now, through this wonder which I behold. This is the house of God, he said, truly indeed, and this is the gate of heaven in all certainty. He fell asleep a poor man, but he rose up rich from the revelation. In the evening he was an exile from the land, where at night he became the master. And in the morning he arose and began the construction of the church as a result of the prophecy that he received, the prophetic dimension of the church. So to honor the place of his vision with the beauty of mysteries, he erected there a stone and brought forth oil, which he poured upon its crest, so that the image of the church be accomplished very clearly. And this is a brief commentary. God's providence guided Jacob to that place where he slept, that he might be the one who betroths the church to the Son of God. Mar Jacob says, the stone Jacob used as a pillow is a symbol of the church. She will return not as a symbol, but as the community, going from stone, church, to community of the church, professing its faith in the divinity of Christ. The rock is an image of the house of the king's bride and her bridal chamber where the mystery will be celebrated. And another piece of the homily of Bethel. Bring oil and pour it over the stone, which is the church, and represent it for me, for after a time it shall be restored. Lay a foundation for the great house of the king's bride, where all the righteous will establish all their offspring. Prepare for me the bridal chamber, so that the mystery might enter and be celebrated there. And according to Jacob, in another further down, that Jacob becomes a priest by pouring this oil, according to Mar Jacob. There's one more. Until I myself, okay. Prepare for me the bridal chamber, so that the mystery might enter and be celebrated there. Until I myself make the great wedding feast through the entire world. This quote leaves again a commentary. This quote leaves no doubt to the fact that in the mind of Jacob of Serug, the stone used by the patriarch Jacob as a pillow refers to the church. The stone is a foreshadowing of what is to come. The church shall no longer be depicted by symbols, for she will return. The son of Isaac did not build the entire structure of the church, but laid down her cornerstone. The righteous who shall come after him will continue building upon it until the Son of God reveals the whole structure. And here, just building upon what I've said before, is the article that I mentioned of El-Khoury, of the Jesus Christ, the Eye of Prophecy. It's a very fine article where he just explains how he sees prophecy is the solution that God chose to solve this problem, meaning the understanding of church. His prophets maintain his unicity and depict his hidden son through prophecies. The prophecies make known the only begotten through types and symbols. These types and symbols contain the whole truth about the Son and are recorded in the Old Testament. This means that God manifested his beloved through the Old Testament, but he had covered it as if with a veil to camouflage the coming of his Son. And here, El-Khoury, and it's worth quoting here, El-Khoury quotes from the veil of Moses, the translation of Sebastian. This is what the veil of Moses' face symbolizes, that the words of prophecy are veiled. The Lord covered Moses' face for this reason, that it might be a type for prophecy, which is also veiled. The Father kept the Son in concealment without anyone being aware, but he wished to reveal this matter to the world in symbolic terms. As I say, Jacob is the best definition you could give is symbolic, his term. He wished to speak about his beloved one through prophecy, and so covered up Moses to make him a figure for prophecy, so that whenever a prophet arose on earth to speak, it might be recognized that his words were veiled from those who heard them, and that there was something hidden, concealed in the matter of which he spoke. And for his words to be understood, it required an awareness of what they symbolize. Thus he cried, this is still from the veil of Moses, thus he cried out in the prophet, I have a secret, I have a secret, so that the world might be aware that the prophecy contained mysteries. The mysteries and the actions of prophecy are veiled. It hides its content in parables so that they might not be recognized. It devises figures and utters its words as if in secret, so that the world might not become openly aware of the Son of God. And just to quote another brief comment from El-Khoury in his article, not in the dissertation, these prophecies do not predict his coming. Rather, they report what the Father reveals through the Son about the Son and his salvific deeds. If this were not so, all prophecies would be of no benefit. The prophets in turn report what they witnessed through the eye of prophecy. The eye of prophecy is Jesus himself, according to El-Huri. The Lord announces in the book of Revelation, well, that's okay, that's enough, that the eye of prophecy is Jesus himself. So now we'll pass on to, how much more time do I have? We'll see what we see. This is, I looked briefly at the letters of Jacob of Serug, because to discover the meaning of a biblical text, one mixes or joins various texts by setting them side by side to discover their meaning. Some might ask, what does this have to do? I think the only way we will understand the prophetic dimension of church in Jacob, the only way we will understand it is through the mixing and blending language. That somehow that the church and Christ and we are mixed and blended. The term to mix is also used by Mar Jacob to describe the union between Christ and the church. He insists that the two of them, Christ, the rich bridegroom, and the church, the poor bride, are made one. To quote from the letters of Jacob, Christ came to take the church and mix it with his body, mix, H-L-T, and make it from him, and the two of them would be one, the groom from the virgin and the bride from baptism. According to Chestnut, this is Roberta Chestnut, who has a lot of ups and downs and is criticized. She does report some things, but she got things wrong about Jacob. Anyway, according to Chestnut, we are unable to determine exactly the way in which they are conceived of as being one, the church and the body. We are unable to determine exactly the way in which they, though Mar Jacob is using the analogy of marriage, it's unclear, according to Chestnut, whether the church comes to belong to Jesus as an extension of his own body. Again, that's not to be ruled out until we understand better the mixing and blending in this time frame. Or whether they are to be one in the way in which any husband and wife are one. At the same time, this use of the term mix also involves a change in the condition of the church, which is mixed with Christ. Again, that has to be looked at, what mixing with Christ means. In this case, the pure bride goes to become the wife of a rich husband. Of course, other aspects as well of mixture could be looked at in Mar Jacob, creation of Adam in letter 23, Christ's relationship to humanity. That's in Chestnut on page 133. And of course, we're waiting for Phil Furness's wonderful translation of the letters, which are on the way, coming. And other aspects of Flint. Always best to overlook Roberta Chestnut's tendency to interpret Mar Jacob in Gnostic ways. She wasn't the only one. This set back the understanding of Mar Jacob until recently. It's important to remember that mixture, HLT, is a part of Syriac tradition, as seen in St. Ephrem, for example. Brock looks closely at mixture goes in with the discussion of theosis and divinization. Brock looks closely at divinization in Ephrem, bracketing it between, to show the traditional aspect of it, bracketing it between St. Athanasius, who could be more orthodox than St. Athanasius. St. Athanasius, God became man so that man might become God. And of course, St. Ephrem in Hymns on Faith 5:17, he gave us divinity, we gave him humanity. Do I have? Okay, I can just resume then the rest of it. And I've given some bibliography on the handout. And if I could always give the paper. What I do in the next part is, it's not so much the way Jacob dealt with the prophetic dimension of church in that particular homily, but it's the going forward of the church, because we don't often think of the church's development until perhaps Pentecost, or at least until the Incarnation. The path of the church described at Bethel is only one part of its journey. Mar Jacob has the conviction that the betrothal between Christ and the church was hidden in the prophecies. According to Mar Jacob, the Old Testament is a huge house in which Moses entered and delineated the picture of the Son and covered it with a veil. Every action in the Old Testament is pointing to the Son of God. When Paul began his ministry to the church, he saw the mystery and proclaimed that the Old Testament mysteriously proclaims the Son of God at the bridegroom. And that's the quotation from Ephesians 5:31-32. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother to be joined to his wife, that the two might become one flesh. The mystery is a profound one, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. So this opened up the whole progressive dimension of church as prophecy in the Old Testament. Then I have, as I mentioned, the research of another unpublished dissertation, if I can think of his name. I'm very bad with names, who is here, Father, who did his dissertation in Bangalore, Father Joshua, and he goes on to look at the betrothal at Mount Sinai, and he shows how that's the beginning, and he showed that already there's a link between Mount Sinai and the Jordan. And then, of course, even though there's a time gap, obviously, but he links Mount Sinai with Jordan, and of course the betrothal at Golgotha. And again, you will be able to see that. I can give you more references. And then finally, I could just highlight the biblical women as images of church. You might say, I would just say, give a place to women. And the fact, I wouldn't have said if it was just Susan Harvey talking about women, but she's talking about women as a model of church. And this is why I quoted from her article, to continue the discussion of the church's journey even after the Incarnation. The tonality is less prophetic, but even here, Mar Jacob uses images of the church which open up its reality. And Susan Harvey writes about biblical women as images of church in Jacob. She talks about Jephthah's daughter as the bride of blood in Judges 11, Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Judah, in a homily devoted to her story in Genesis 38, and the sinful woman, which puts together the four accounts of that. And of course, I'm not sure, yes, their homily, she often works with Ophir Moon's manner. And the homily on Jephthah's daughter has already been translated as well, and that's with Tekla. And then, of course, the Tamar has been published by Sebastian. I don't think it's in Tekla, but it's in Le Muséon. And then the Sinful Woman has been published already as well, and that's by Scott Johnson. So I don't know if that's... No more time? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary, for this beautiful presentation.